Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I am going to do the Reread Book Tag. The original tag is by Roz from Scallydandling about the books. I can never say the channel's name. I will post her original tag below. I was tagged by Nell and Scott from Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot, and I will tag their video below as well. So the first question is, where do you sit on the rereading scale from almost never to all the time? And currently, I would have to say it's definitely on the lower end of rereading. Almost never, maybe a little bit more than almost never. Like, very sporadically. Let's say very sporadically, I am a rereader. Question 2 is, has that changed over your reading life? And yes, it has. I think like a lot of people, I reread a lot as a kid. I would keep going back to my favorite books and rereading them over and over and over again. And even into my early adulthood, while I had more variety of things to choose from and more access to books as I got older, I did still return to those favorite books. Like every year I would reread The Hobbit or, pick up an old favorite. But where I am now, I barely ever reread. But I'm just getting back into reading. So if you haven't been following my channel, I've mentioned this a couple different times, but I am kind of coming off, before this year, I'm coming off of a pretty long reading hiatus, or just, I wasn't reading for a very long time, and there's a lot of different reasons, doesn't matter. But I just started getting back into reading a bit last year and very much this year. And I think because of that, because I'm so excited to finally be reading books again, it's meant that I want to consume. There is a fly. It's meant that I've wanted to consume like all the books I haven't been able to read over the last 5 years. It's almost like I'm playing a bit of catch up. So because of that, I really haven't been rereading barely at all. Question 3 is, when do you reread? Immediately after finishing a book, years later, when the mood strikes, etc. I've never reread a book immediately after finishing, but I have gone back, especially if it's a book that has a big plot twist, or, it kind of, everything shifts at the end and you're like, what just happened? I will go back into the book and maybe reread a few chapters or go back earlier and try to find some clues. I did this when I read Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, because I got to the end and I'm like, I don't understand what just happened, and I went back and had to reread quite a few sections to understand what the ending meant. So normally it's years later, kind of, either it's because I've forgotten the book, so I might remember that, oh, I really like that book, but not really remember much else about it, so I might revisit it to refamiliarize myself, or if the mood strikes where I just feel in the mood for, I'll mention The Hobbit again because that's the book I probably reread the most. I'm just in the mood for The Hobbit right now, and I'll grab it. Question 4 was, why do you reread books? Because I enjoy them. I probably wouldn't reread something that just rubbed me the wrong way, or I wouldn't necessarily give a second chance to a book, if that makes sense. I might go back to a book that I had previously DNF'd maybe and give it another go, but if I finish a book, if I've actually read the book and I didn't really jive with me, I probably wouldn't return to it, unless it was something maybe that I read in high school that I think now, as a more mature reader, that maybe I just didn't get at the time. But I haven't done that as of yet, but maybe I would do that. But as it currently stands, I reread books because they are books that I enjoy and I want to revisit them. I know there are a lot of book lovers out there who just don't reread books, and I kind of don't understand that a bit. I do and I don't. I do understand, because I know there are so many books out there to get to, and there's just not enough time, so why would you revisit a book? But on the same token, sorry for traffic noises, by the same token, like I rewatch movies that I love. Like I watch the same movies over and over again. So why wouldn't I reread books as well? Like those things are comparable to me. It's something that I know I like, and I feel with books too. For most books that are favorites, like even if I've reread them many times, you can usually pull more out of them on a reread. So that is why I reread books. Number 5 is, how do you reread? Faster, slower, rereading just the best bits. I've never gone back and reread just the best bits. I don't think faster or slower. I think I read it at the same pace. Although I will say that if it's a book that maybe is quite a meaty book and I read it fast the first time, I probably would read it slower to kind of like get all the nuance I missed the first time around. But I think on the whole, I read at the same pace on a reread as I do the first time that I read them. Number 6 is, sorry, more traffic. I have to keep my windows open. It is a million degrees. Number 6 is, who or what do you reread? More specifically, which authors or genres or individual books? Individual books, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, although I haven't reread that in a very long time. Tolkien is like a comforting, like Middle Earth is a comforting world that I like to revisit. But specifically The Hobbit, although I love Lord of the Rings, it's a lot of pages to get through, and The Hobbit is a nice short read that's still set in that world that I very much feel comfortable in. And I tend to reread a lot of books that I enjoyed as a child or adolescent, which are also easier to get through because, like, let's face it, like, you can read through a middle grade pretty easily. So I have revisited Anne of Green Gables series before. I have revisited On the Banks of Plum Creek many times, which is my favorite in the Little House on the Prairie series. I have revisited Peter Pan. So the books I tend to reread the most are books that are like middle grade or that I enjoyed as a child, plus Lord of the Rings. That would be like the only non-kid book that I probably have like returned to a lot. Number 7 is there a book that you found better when you reread it? I can't really think of an example, although there are a couple of books that I would like to reread because I think they will get better on a reread. So I will link up me talking about this book, but I read Split Tooth earlier this year, and it, I initially gave it 3 stars, and then it just lived in my head, and the ideas in that book kind of permeated into my neurons, and I ended up going back and bumping it up to 4 stars, and I feel like if I reread it, I would bump it up to 5 probably. I just think that that's a book that you have to sit with, and I think it was a book that I didn't know what it was when I was reading it, and I think I was expecting a certain thing. Although I have not read a book that I found better on a reread, I think that one could be a contender for that. The same thing with, I haven't talked about this one yet, but I just recently read The Deep by River Solomon, and I also gave that 3 stars, and it also is permeating into my brain, and I think I'm going to go back up and bump it up to 4, and I feel like I'll probably reread it next year, and it'll probably go up in my estimation again. I feel like those 2 books are kind of similar in that they're a little bit weird. They're not very straightforward, and I think there's like there's a lot of reading in between the lines and a lot of like percolating that has to happen. Question number 8 is there a book that was worse upon a reread? Oh, yes. Saddens me to say, because I am a Tolkien fan, but I reread Roverandom earlier this year as part of a middle grade march, and while it wasn't horrible, it was just kind of like meh. I remember liking it a lot more when I read it when I was younger, and it just, I don't think it works in book format. I think the original story was a story that Tolkien had been telling his sons like at bedtime, and then he basically took all those stories and put them like into a more cohesive narrative, like into a book. But I think it reads very much as like an oral story, like as a parent just making up a story to their kid, and there wasn't, it was just a lot of like sequential events that were happening to the main character, and there wasn't, yeah. So I was a little bit disappointed in that reread because it just, yeah, it just didn't hold up for me. Question 9 is, which one book have you reread most times? And I'm not 100% sure, but it would definitely be between On the Banks of Plum Creek. So that, I think that one is like either the third or the fourth, maybe, in the Little House on the Prairie series. And that's the one that if you had watched the Little House on the Prairie TV show back in the 70s or whenever it was, the characters and the setting, like that's On the Banks of Plum Creek, like Nellie Olson, like all those characters come from that book. So when people think of Little House on the Prairie, really you're thinking about that book. And it was definitely my favorite as a kid, and I read it over and over and over and over and over again. The other one that I read more times than I can count is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It was the only Roald Dahl book I ever read as a child. It was the only one I had, which makes me kind of sad because I think I really would have enjoyed all of his other books as a kid. But Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I read until that book started to fall apart. So those were the questions for the Reread Book Tag. Please share with me what book you have reread the most, or if you want to do this tag, please let me know. I'm not going to tag anyone, but if you want to do it, please let me know that you're doing it because I would like to check out your answers to these questions. So as always, thanks everyone for watching, and we will talk soon. Take care. Bye.